everyone, this is the Undying Nephilim, and today I'm going to show you guys the next faction that is being added into Hyrule Conquest, and that faction is the Fairies of Tarm. I know I've said it like 4 or 5 times now, each time I make one of these videos, although I didn't say it with Labrina, and I didn't say it with the Lizzlefoss, but this is probably my favorite faction, and I think I really mean it this time. These guys just wait until you guys see. I'm gonna go ahead and show you all of their stuff. There's a lot of things I'm gonna have to cover, so this quite possibly will end up being the longest video where I show all the new features of a new faction, because the fairies play the most different from all the other factions in the game. That includes the Goma and the Dark Nuts. They have so many weird different things, which were not possible in Medieval 2, but are possible in 0 AD. So I will go ahead and show you. So what are some of the things the fairies have that none of the other factions have? For one, they have no worker units, and they have their season shifting. So I guess I will start with the worker units and stuff, and I'll work my way to the seasons. So fairies have no worker units. How the heck do they build buildings, and how do they gather resources? In order to build buildings, the fairies summon them from this structure here, which is called the Wishing Well. What this structure does is it generates territory, so you use the structure to expand your territory, and it summons all of the fairy buildings. So I'll go ahead and summon another Wishing Well. You can only summon inside your territory. I'll go ahead and summon it at the very end here, so it'll extend the territory. And when you summon a fairy building, there's this awesome summoning effect where it slowly comes out of the ground. And if you'll notice, the building slowly builds itself. This building right here is only required to place it. Once you place the building, it'll continue to summon even if this one gets destroyed or you start building more buildings. So you could hypothetically build infinite buildings at the same time using one of these, which is really awesome. Now that it's done, all of the pink smoke will slowly drift away. And we got another Wishing Well. So that is how the fairies build their buildings, which none of the other factions in the game can do that. It's absolutely awesome, and I love it. It's so cool. I love the look of their structures, too. Also, if you haven't noticed, which you might have noticed, the fairy buildings all have their own sound effects, which is something I've horribly neglected for pretty much all the other factions. All of them use the building sound effects from 0 AD, so hopefully soon I'll set aside time to go back and add my own sound effects for all of the buildings for other factions. But the fairies, all of their buildings right now have all their own sound effects, which you will hear as I start building things. Anyway, before I get into the seasons, I guess I will talk about how they gather resources. So, the way they gather resources is somewhat undecided at the moment. I will go ahead and describe both methods. So, whatever the case ends up being, these structures right here are what you will use to gather resources. These little stone slabs that are called the magic menhirs. I'll go ahead and place one here. So the way I want these to gather resources is when it's complete, you'll see this ring around it, and everything within the ring, all the sources of resources. So these trees right here, or if it was closer to the rupees or these bushes here, what it will do is it'll slowly gather the resources from everything within this ring here. You can kind of see this long ring along the edge. That is how I want this thing to function. However, the max distance gathering function in 0 AD seems to be broken, or I'm doing something wrong and it does not seem to work. I have asked some of the 0 AD people what's going on, and they said they'll look into it. So I don't know if that'll be working by the time I release this publicly. If you're a patron, it won't be working that way because you'll be downloading this as you watch this video. So the second method, which I might end up sticking with because I kind of like it, even though I was going to use it for another faction, but the second method that these gather resources is they just passively generate all of the resources up here by just sitting there and doing nothing. I wanted to use that for another faction, but I might end up using it for the fairies, even if the other method gets implemented into the engine. I'll probably leave it up to the patrons, up to a vote. So yeah, the magic men here is that is how the fairies gather resources, since they don't have workers. So now that we have described how the fairies make their buildings and how they gather resources without any workers, I suppose we will talk about their seasons. But first, let me go ahead and place all of their buildings. So I'll place their fountains here. And the Great Fountain. There's the Dome. Place that up there, and this down there. While those are all summoning, I'll go ahead and summon the fairy walls, because their walls are really cool. So instead of walls, the fairies have these things called ley lines, which are these... Well, you can't see them while they're summoning. After it's finished summoning and the pink fog goes away, you'll see they're just these kind of vague... these vague glowing lines along the ground that'll slow down and confuse enemies. Depending on the season, the ley lines will function differently. Like in the winter, it'll turn into like this solid wall of ice that'll prevent enemies from crossing, which will be really awesome. There, now that the summoning fog has gone away, you can see them a little more clearly. Yeah, those are the ley lines. Those have finished summoning. That's finished summoning. That's finished summoning. Actually, let me just turn instant build on. I always forget to do that. Alright. So, the next feature, and probably the biggest feature and the main feature of the fairies, is their ability to change the seasons. And they do so at this structure here, which is called the sundial. As you can see by looking at it, it is currently on spring, which is represented by green. And you will be able to change the seasons at will. Not initially. At first, you actually need to research the following season. So right now, I can't change it to summer. I have to research the secret of summer. And when I do that, I can change the season at will. So I'll go ahead and do that. I'll research that. Now that I've researched the secret of summer, I can change the season to summer. And I'll go ahead and zoom out so you can see everything change. So yeah, when you change the season, all of their buildings will change to reflect the season. All of their units will also change, but I'll get into that when I get to their units. So in their summer, their buildings have a more red tint. The textures are a little darker. The ground is different. There's a lot of clovers and flowers. The leaves that are falling change. The little sparkles turn red. And even the design of some of the buildings completely changes, like the Great Fairy Fountains here. The design is completely different than what it looked like in spring. It's got all these tropical plants growing out here. I just think that's so cool. That's just the coolest thing ever. Technically, it was kind of possible in Medieval 2 to do that, but in Medieval 2 there was only spring and winter. There wasn't all 4 seasons, and things didn't quite change the way I wanted, so it didn't really work very well in Medieval 2. But because 0 AD is awesome, it works pretty much perfectly in 0 AD. So I'll go ahead and research autumn and change the season to autumn. And now it is autumn, and I got all these dying leaves under the buildings. You can see the little red and yellow leaves falling, and the sparkles are changing yellow. The ley lines turned yellow. And I have instant build on, so the seasons are changing instantly. However, when you're playing the game normally, you can't actually change the seasons instantly. It takes, I think, about a minute to change each season. So if you're wanting to change the season to do something in particular, you'll kind of have to time it around that. There are techs that the fairies can get that will shorten the time it changes, or the time it takes to change season. And one of their heroes also has, I think, a passive that reduces the time it takes to change seasons. But I'll get to that in the hero video. So yeah, let us change it to winter. So I'll research winter and change it. There, now everything's winter. So as the leaves start to disappear, you'll see little snowflakes, the ground will turn to ice, all of the water in the fountains will turn to ice, which is really awesome. The ley lines turn into solid walls of ice. That'll slow down enemies. Even the waterfall from the sky here freezes and turns into ice, which is awesome. I love this feature so much. This alone is one of the reasons why these guys are probably my favorite faction. They're so cool. So yeah, those are the 4 seasons. Let me research spring so that I can go back to spring. And now I'm back to spring. Once you've researched all 4 seasons, you don't need to research them again. You can switch between the seasons at will, which I'll go ahead and demonstrate. Just switch between all the seasons super rapidly. Alright, anyway, back at spring. So yeah, that is the season changing, and that is probably my favorite thing the fairies have. So I'll go ahead and go through all of their units now. Let me go ahead and summon them all. Oh yeah, up here they have a unit. Alrighty, so these are all the fairy units, and at first it might seem like they have a very small roster of units. This is kind of not the case because their units completely change function and abilities depending on the season. So if you take all 4 seasons into account, their roster is actually slightly larger than the roster of all the other factions, which is 20 units. I think they have 26 units? It might be 24 or 26. The catch is you can't use all of those at the same time like you can with other factions. You can only use 6 types of units. This unit right here is actually one of the hero units. This is actually probably my favorite fairy unit, but I won't go into details about it until I get to the hero video. Although you can probably tell what it is if you've played Twilight Princess. So I'll go ahead and move that one out of the way for now. Anyway, so let us go through the fairy units, starting with this little thing here. This is the Stray Fairy. It is based on the Stray Fairy from Majora's Mask, those little tiny floating abominations. And the Stray Fairy is the scout units for the Fairy of Tarm, so you'll use it to reveal the map and scout around. However, I have the whole map revealed, so can't really do that, I guess. Its abilities slightly change depending on the season. In spring, they regenerate their health. So if they get attacked or damaged and you manage to get them out of combat, they will fully heal themselves after, say, I think it's 1 HP per second, and they have 75 HP. So a little over a minute, they can completely recover all of their health. I'll go ahead and switch to summer. If I remember correctly, they deal splash damage in the summer. So they're able to attack multiple enemies around them. And they turn into the red or pink variations. Actually, I'll go over that really quickly. One other way to tell what season you're in, other than the fact that all your buildings have changed, is the fairies will change to one of several colors in each season. In spring, they are either green or white. In summer, they are either red or pink. In autumn, they're either orange or yellow. And in winter, they are purple or blue. So that's one way to tell. Also, the type of wings that they have will change depending on the season also. Anyway, back to the Stray Fairy. Stray Fairy has the same little floppy wings on its head each season. That doesn't change, just its color does. So let's go to autumn. And the Stray Fairies move faster in autumn. And they also have a larger line of sight, but I can't really demonstrate that because I already have the map revealed. So they're an even better scout unit in autumn. And in the winter, they gain the little bubbles that they had in Majora's Mask, which is just really cool. The bubble makes them resistant to conventional weapons, so you'll have to attack them with mages if you want to deal significant damage to them. So they become kind of defensive in the winter with their little bubbles shields. And that is the Stray Fairy, the scout unit of the Fairies of Tarm. Next up is the Fairy Drove. The Fairy Drove is this little tiny swarm of very, very small fairies. It's a little hard to see them. It'll probably be pretty hard to see them on YouTube because of the lower resolution. So I'll go ahead and make a dozen or so of them. I'll get them all together into a giant swarm. So the Fairy Drove is kind of like the Goma larva. It's in particular the Goma soldier larva. It's a swarming unit. They are very, very weak. They deal very little damage. They have almost no health, and they have almost no armor. So at a glance, it seems like they're easily destroyed, but because they're so small and hard to hit, they have a very high dodge rating. I think it starts out at 25%, and it gets higher depending on the season too. So yeah, in spring, their ability is they have a very, very small chance to resurrect themselves when they die. So if they get killed, I think it's a 10% chance that they'll survive and respawn with full health, which is just really awesome and useful. In summer, actually I was in winter, now I'm in spring, so let's go back to summer. In the summer, if I remember right, their dodge rating is... Oh no, in summer they deal more damage. Their attack stats just double. So they deal 16 pierce damage instead of 8. In autumn, I think autumn is when they have the higher dodge rating. No, their dodge rating didn't go up. Oh no, in autumn they move faster. They just... I can already see them moving faster. They just straight up have more speed. Yep, they have a speed of 13, which is almost as fast as cavalry. So yeah, in autumn, the Fairy Droves move almost as fast as cavalry, which is pretty awesome. I love these little guys. And then in winter... Is winter the higher dodge rating? No, I actually don't... Oh no, in winter they have... their magic resistance goes up, so they're more resistant to magic attacks. So they kind of become a sort of anti-mage unit in the winter. Actually, I might even give them an attack bonus against magic units in the winter, just to give them a little bit of a buff. So yeah, that is the Fairy Drove. The Fairies of Tarm Swarm unit. You'll probably have quite a few of these in your armies, especially because they're so cheap to produce. I'm going to move them out of the way. Alrighty, let's go back to spring. The next unit that the fairies have is the Banshee, which are these larger humanoid fairies with these giant magic wand staffs. I'm actually not sure if a wand would be called a wand if it was like a staff. It might just be called a staff. Someone in the comments will correct me. I just call it a wand. I'll call it a wand for now, though. So the Banshee is basically the Fairies' run-of-the-mill soldier unit. So it's a melee unit. However, it deals magic damage. And also, because they fly, they can hover over terrain. Actually, all of the fairy units, except for this guy here, they can all hover over mountains and water and terrain. So they can get around the map pretty easily, which is awesome. They technically are not flying units, though, so they don't have a weakness against ranged attacks like most flying units do. They are classified as hovering, not flying. But anyway, the Banshee. In spring, I actually cannot for the life of me remember what the heck they do in spring. Oh, I know what they do in spring. They have camouflage, but stealth and camouflage are not in the engine yet, so they basically have nothing special in spring for the time being. In summer, I believe they deal fire damage. Yep, they deal fire damage. So they'll light enemies on fire, which is pretty awesome. In autumn, they deal spirit damage, I think, because they have a wind attack. Yep, they deal spirit damage. If I remember right, they also move faster. No, they moved faster in summer. I think they have... I can't remember what else they do in autumn. I probably should have had a little thing on the side of the screen here to remind me. Anyway, in winter, they deal shadow damage and ice damage, or technically water damage, not ice. And I believe they also stun enemies. So yeah, that is the Banshee. Really, really cool unit. And their wings also change with each season, which is awesome too. In the winter, they have moth wings. In the spring, they have grasshopper wings. In the summer, they have dragonfly wings. In autumn, they have bee wings. Not the ones from Star Wars, like the little things that buzz around. Alrighty. The next unit that the Fairies of Tarm has is the Great Fairies, which are a very, very incredibly powerful unit. Let me go ahead and switch back to spring. One of the most powerful magic units in the game. In spring, however, they cannot attack. They can only heal, so they're actually a healer unit in the spring. And they will use their magic to heal your wounded soldiers in battle. And then in summer, they shoot out fireballs. So they deal fire damage, and they also deal splash damage in the summer too. So they'll later in the match, I guess I'll go ahead and demonstrate it. They'll lob these giant fireballs into these poor Gerudo here and torch them all. In autumn, they deal spirit damage, and they have a wind attack. And their wind attack will also deal knockback and send everyone flying, which is awesome. Knockback is one of my favorite things in the engine if you've been following my videos. I love knockback so much. And then in the winter, they deal ice damage, they stun enemies, and they create this little area of ice underneath where the projectile hits that slow down enemies that walk over it, which is really, really cool. So that is the Great Fairy, and it's 4 different variations. Let's go back to spring. The next unit is really awesome. It is the Fae, and the Fae changes with each season more than any of the other fairy units. Its design is completely different, and it's extremely different in each season, but I'll go through each of them one by one. So in spring, the Fae turns into the Fae Golem, which is this giant, roughly humanoid, walking monstrosity. It's pretty slow moving, but it is immune to knockback, and it also deals knockback damage. And it's just a straight up melee unit with pretty high armor values. So this is probably a unit you'll have in your army when you want a lot of meat in your army, because it can take a lot of punishment and damage. Most of the fairy units are very fragile, despite the fact that they're really powerful. They have a lot of glass cannon units, except for this guy. So yeah, that is the fairy golem. So let us go to summer. In summer, the Fey Golem turns into the Fey Strider, which is this horrifying spider monster. Roughly inspired by a certain spider form of a certain fairy from the Oracle games. So, the Fey Strider, in addition to being very creepy, is the siege unit of the Fairies of Tarm. It is a ranged siege unit, so it'll launch out these bursts of wind from its glowing eye here. And the wind will cause all sorts of damage to buildings and stuff and send leaves flying everywhere, and it's really awesome. I'll try and show it at some point against all these poor Gerudo. You know what? I'll go ahead and do it now. Because they only have one more. Actually, no, I'll go through the rest of their stuff first, and then I'll show it. So anyway, let's go to autumn. In autumn, the Fey Strider turns into the Fey Gate, which is this swirly monstrosity here that moves very, very slowly. And what the Fey Gate does is summon a bunch of little fairies anywhere on the map. So it's basically like a little mobile fairy fountain. So I can go ahead and summon a bunch of these droves. There we go. Bunch of droves. So it's a little mobile factory. It loses its ability to attack, though, so it can't attack enemies. And it's also extremely slow, so you might want to move them into position during a different season, and then switch into autumn when they're closer to an enemy base. Or if your base is destroyed and they're all you have left, but you want to keep increasing the size of your army, you can kind of use these to bolster the size of your army in a last-ditch attempt to win. So yeah, that is the Fey Gate. Let us change it to winter. In winter, the gate turns into the Fey Wisp, which is this also hovering, swirly monstrosity thing. It technically doesn't hover, it just crawls along the ground with this one tentacle dangling from beneath it. This unit is also a non-combat unit like the gate. It doesn't attack enemies, however, this circle around it will slow down enemies and make them move very slowly because everything in that circle is super cold. I imagine I might make it so that units that are naturally resilient to the cold, or you know, like creatures that live in the snow, like winter wolves or even other winter fairy units, might not be affected by this. At some point, I want to make it so that these can also freeze enemy buildings, but I don't think that is currently possible in the engine. Kind of like the frost worms from Warcraft 3. I think that'd be really awesome. And of course, when stealth is added into the engine, these guys will also have stealth. They'll be invisible. So very, very, very useful support unit. More so down the road than they are now. Alrighty. The next unit is not exactly a unit. It doesn't change. I mean, it visually changes with each season, but its function doesn't change. It's actually the merchant. Oh. It's called the Zana, which is a gift-giving fairy, and it is the merchant unit for the Fairies of Tarm. So you use it to trade between the meeting spring and an ally's marketplace. That in itself isn't unusual, but the one thing about these that sets them apart from other merchant units is you can research an ability called the Fairies Kiss. And when you research it, it gets this giant ring around it. which is useless for your own units. It doesn't do anything for your units, but if you have an allied player and you use these to follow their armies around, everything in this ring will have some awesome bonuses, which you'll just have to find out when you play online. So yeah, that is the Zana. Alright. That, I believe, is all of the fairy units and their various forms that change with the seasons. So I'll go ahead and change back to summer. And I'll go ahead and attack these Gerudo down here with all my units.
Cowslip, dewdrop, lavender.
Let's gather all my fairies together and go wipe them out. I'll make a few more. Make some more great fairies. Where's my... Alright, I'll go ahead and attack them in the summer and then switch to the winter. Or switch to autumn and then winter. This poor horse might be spared the crossfire of battle. Here we go. Great fairies with their fireballs. I really want to see these guys attack. It's pretty awesome. There he goes. So cool. Alright, let's change to autumn. Now the great fairies will deal wind damage and send them flying everywhere. Let's go ahead and change it to winter. Shoot out these little icicles and impale the poor Gerudo there. And you can see it slows them down too, because the icy ground. And I'll go ahead and change it. There we go. Now the great fairies can't attack, but they can heal. Run, great fairy, run! Oh, they might actually kill that golem there. Let's go ahead and change back to summer. Fireballs! Oh, the Strider, it's so cool. Fairy Swarm. Sorry, I'm so fixated on destroying these two little Gerudos. Oh, come on. Kill those two Gerudos. Oh, they killed that great fairy. Come on, it's just one Gerudo. Kill her. There we go. Now she's stuck. Okay. Anyway, sorry I got distracted by that. So, I think that's enough combat for now. I think I have demonstrated most of the fairy stuff. I'm trying to think if there's any other features they have. I'll go ahead and make their wonder. Actually, I'm just going to kill all their units. So much pink blood. I'll go ahead and make their wonder, though, because I show the wonder in all the videos. And yeah, I have instant build on, so it'll be done in a second. Alrighty, so the wonder of the Fairies of Tarm is the Unicorn's Fountain, which is probably just a platonic form, but here it is. A fountain that no one has ever found, not even the fairies. As I usually do, I'll go ahead and show their Titan, but I will not go into details on their Titan until the hero video. So, there is the Fairies of Tarm Titan. If you can recognize who it is, then kudos for you. I'll give a hint. He is from the Oracle of Seasons. And he is awesome. I like him better than the Great Deku Tree and the Mako Tree of Laverna. Alrighty. I have a feeling I am forgetting something. The same thing happened when I showed Laverna. Is there anything else these guys have that I haven't shown? Look through their building list. Nope. I think I've shown everything. That video might be shorter than I thought it was going to be. I guess most of their features were concentrated in the season changing and the way they build buildings. And their units shifting between seasons. So yeah, that was the Fairies of Tarm, my current favorite faction, and they probably will be for the next few factions. The next two factions that I will be working on, which probably won't be soon because there's a few things that need to be done first. But when I finish those few things that need to be done first, I will be working on the Stalfos and the Sheikah next. The Stalfos might actually become my favorite faction when I get to them. Maybe even more so than the fairies. But I was going to work on redoing the Kingdom of Hyrule. But some of the things I want to give the Kingdom of Hyrule are technically not possible in the engine yet. They are being added in the next version. So I'm going to hold off on redoing the Hylians until they release some of those additions to 0 AD. So whenever I release this, if you're a patron and you're downloading this now, the Hylians will be the same. And when I release the next version publicly, the Hylians will be the same as they've been. I'm probably going to make another minor faction, which I'll go ahead and show in a video when I finish them. So yeah, I think that is it. Stay tuned for the hero video for Labyrinth and the Fairies. I'll show their heroes, their hero units, and the two titans. So this guy will show up. I'm gonna forever be paranoid at the end of these videos that I'm forgetting something. If I forgot something, I will show it in the hero video. Anyway, hopefully you guys like the look of the Fairies of Tarm. And hopefully you will enjoy playing as them. So thank you for watching, and I hope you guys all have a good one.
Hey, listen!